The Retirement Café Podcast, episode 45, Pension Freedoms and the Alternatives to Buying an Annuity, with William Burrows.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Café Podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and Accredited Later Life Advisor, Justin King.
I am really chuffed to be joined once again by William Burrows, known as Billy Burrows, who joined me last week talking all about annuities, which I know that everyone's been very interested in, and there's been lots of comments and discussion about that. So thank you for joining me once again, Billy. So this time, we covered annuities last time to some depth. We touched on something called drawdown, and we touched on something called pensions freedom. Could you kind of, with your expertise, could you talk a little bit more about what those terms mean?
Well, good to be back with you. I explained it to people that it's about converting a pension pot into income. Now, most people will be familiar with money in their bank account. Your salary gets paid in, they draw money out, pay the bills. If they draw too much income, they go into overdraft. If they don't spend enough, they save. Now, with pension drawdown, it's really simple. You leave your money in the pension pot, you invest it in the stock market, and then you draw either a regular income, say monthly or quarterly, or ad hoc payments. You simply take income out of the pension pot, and then when you die, any money left in the pension pot can be left to the family. Now, one of the paradoxes about drawdown is it's really simple to understand. You're just drawing money out of your pension pot, but it's probably one of the most complicated arrangements to set up and to manage properly. It's difficult and complicated to manage because there are so many different risks. There's a risk of running out of income. There's a risk of investing in the wrong place. There's a risk of inflation. There's a risk of changing circumstances.
Yeah. So, this sounds pretty darn complicated. I know from talking to people, whether you're just out and about or even talking to clients who are pretty au fait with lots of financial terms and technology, that lots of people don't really spend an awful lot of time looking at their pensions over their working life. They in financial terms, they look at their mortgages, they may make sure their credit cards are paid off, they think about their utility bills and the suppliers. They can be pretty up to speed on a lot of financial things. But when I talk to them about, well, when did you last, have a look at your pension and where it's actually invested, they kind of, there's not often. And of course, by moving into this thing called drawdown, they probably need to look at it a bit more often than they've been used to.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Engagement is the key. Now, I have a lot of people who come to me and they say, Billy, while I was working, I used to put money in the pension pot. The accountant told me I was getting tax relief. And I didn't really, take any notice. But now I'm retiring, I've realized that A, I've got quite a lot of money. B, there are so many different options. And C, I'm totally confused. But it's at that point people start engaging. And they have what I call an insatiable appetite for information. And I find that once people do engage and they get over the pain barrier of having to learn all these terms, they can understand it fairly quickly. But the more they understand, the more they realize they need people like you and me to give them a guiding hand.
Mm. So do you have, what as an advisor, do you have a strategy around how you invest clients' money? Do you have an idea that you'll keep a certain amount of cash for somebody available, just certain amount in shares, certain amount in bonds? What's your philosophy?
My philosophy, yeah. I mean, sort of, first of all, I think it's really important to recognize that people are different. So I have people in three broad pots. I have those with relatively small pension pots. I have those with what I call medium size, and those with the high net worth clients. Now, if I sort of aim this at what I call, Middle Britain, and it's a broad church, but if you've got sort of £200,000 or £300,000 in a drawdown, I'm really attracted to what I call the three-pot approach. You have a pot of money in cash or very low risk that's going to provide your income for the next couple of years. Core of your investments, and this is really important, the core of your investments, and maybe it's 75%, needs to be in a properly risk-rated, diverse portfolio. I use a lot of multi-assets. And because you've got some money in cash, because you've got your core risk-rated, it means that you could probably actually have a little bit in a growth fund. And so the third pot is the growth pot. Now, the difficult bit, and I try and practice what I preach here, and it's quite difficult, is that if you are having money in cash to pay the income, you've got to top that up.
Yeah.
Now, people with the high net worth clients, I use a lot of discretionary fund management, and what they will do is that they will try and run a drawdown more on a cash flow basis. The clearer we are about how much income and when we need it, you can then tailor make a portfolio that can deliver the income when it's required.
Absolutely.
And sorry, and just to finish, and if you've got a relatively small pot, there's no reason why you can't take advantage, of drawdown. And there's some really good, products from some of the insurance companies. Royal London and Prudential, for example, have very good, relatively low risk, low maintenance drawdown plans.
Yeah, and then how we mentioned, and we touched on our last week's podcast about at what point we might consider an annuity. So how often do you review that investment management or the investments of those pensions for your clients?
Let me answer that in a slightly roundabout way. Now, we talk about the so-called retirement journey. And the retirement journey starts off, let's say, at 60. And at 60, most people understandably want to be in control and to make decisions. So it's understandable, why you're in drawdown. You then have the middle part of retirement. In fact, you mentioned this so-called U-shaped income curve where you may need less income. And then you end up with later life where really you shouldn't be taking any risk and you're more concerned about maybe long-term care issues. So you then you have this retirement journey, and at any point of this retirement journey, there are two things happening. There is all of the complexity and technical stuff that we know about, but there's also a lot of behavioral stuff and emotional stuff. So I think as you go through retirement, you should be doing two things. One is you should be looking at making sure that you meet your income requirements, and secondly, that you've got the right risk profile and the right attitude to risk. So in a nutshell, as you progress through your retirement journey, you should be taking less risk, and an important strategy in that de-risking is to think about buying annuities. Now, there's a really interesting technical bit, and the technical bit is the so-called mortality drag, mortality cross subsidy. Now, let me try and keep this as simple as I can. There is a concept which we talk about maintaining your annuity purchasing power. Let's say you've got £100,000 at 60, and you could buy an annuity, let's say £4,000 a year. By the time you get to 65, if you've been drawing the £4,000 from your pension pot, two things will have happened. Your pension pot hopefully will have grown, and you're 5 years older. But can that pot in 5 years' time still buy the same annuity income. Now, because of the mortality cross subsidy, there is a real paradox here. The older you get, the greater the investment returns you need in order to maintain your annuity purchasing power. But exactly the point in life where you should be taking less risk, not more risk.
Right.
Now, I'm sorry it's so complex, but, that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of clients that I've been working with are in the lucky position that actually pensions all of a sudden have become something that they can pass on to their family without an inheritance tax bill. This is still a relatively new thing. I mean, what's your views on this?
Now, it's really interesting, and I have to go back to this client journey, this customer journey. Now, at 60, your priority is very much, I want to leave money to the children. And I'll ask you whether you agree with this. The older you get, your attitude starts changing. And it doesn't matter how much money you've got, you suddenly start to think, hang on, the kids are quite comfortable with maybe left them some money, help them with the house. Actually, we're worried as a family of running out of income ourselves. So our attitudes start changing. So I find that once people start getting older, inheritance is really important. But what's more important is to make sure that there's enough money in their pension pot, in their assets, so that they can ensure that they've got enough income for their needs.
Absolutely.
Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, I do. I think the other thing that is very pronounced is, and important to people, is the ability, in case they need to pay for care.
Yeah.
It often is an insurance policy. We're not going to spend all our cash. We don't want to give it all away because we know the cost of care, and we don't. Most of our clients are very realistic that they don't expect the cost of care to be funded by the government. They know that they've got assets over the threshold, including that they own their own homes, and they have some pension pots. So they know that if they do need care, they would like to have a nice care home or care provided at home, in their own home. Yeah. And they know that comes at a cost. And any money that they've still got tucked away in their pension pot is a nice feeling of security for them, that they can draw on that if necessary.
Some really interesting issues there. First of all, pension freedoms has fundamentally changed pension planning. There's a really interesting debate in the advisor community. When do you start taking money from your pension pot? There's a school of thought that says because you can leave your pension pot, to the family, it's probably worth explaining to listeners the mechanics. Any money left in a pension pot can be left to any beneficiaries you wish. There is a tax element to it. If you die before age 75, your beneficiaries don't have to pay any tax at all on any money they take out. If you die after the age of 75, then your beneficiaries will pay tax at their marginal rate on any income or lump sums they take out. The rules are very generous. I do worry a little bit, and other people think the same, that a future government could change the rules. I don't want to unduly scare people, but I think, if you are making these big decisions, you have to be, aware of that. And the other factor, of course, is your house. Now, I explain equity release as lender of last resort, and I really don't think you should consider equity release, i.e. taking money out of your house, until the very last thing you do. But armed with all that information, there's some really interesting planning opportunities for people. Long-term care is very, very important. And I think that's why you need a good advisor. And I explain this to people, that you really need to separate the strategy from the tactics. The most important thing that people like you and I can do with our clients is to help them think about the long term. The better the planning, the better the results. I explain to people, although you need a plan, it doesn't always have to be terribly sophisticated. A basic plan is better than no plan at all, but you've got to have a plan. Then when you've got the plan, you need to think about tactics. So things like annuities and drawdown is all about tactics. The most important thing is to get a plan.
Absolutely. And of course, as we know, plans dissipate very quickly, with real life moving on and families change and circumstances change and tax rules change and health changes and all types of things. But it's still not a reason to not have a plan in the first place, because that's the true benefit of a plan is that it becomes adaptable and changeable. And we've thought, we're developing one at the moment for a client who we're just recently taking on. And we're working out, okay, so if we cost in 5 years worth of care, well, what is that right? Shall we do that? Well, that's probably about right. Let's put in 5 years worth of care and make sure we've got 5 years worth of cash for that. And, and all those what if scenarios. And I think that the plan obviously still needs to be robust and invested correctly with the thought process that I think with the thought process that you've got to review regularly as you would do any other journey that you make in life. I always think if I'm driving from the south coast to the northeast of Scotland, that I've got a plan, but it probably won't go to plan.
Somebody said to me, if you want to go north and you're heading northeast or northwest, it's not a problem because you can easily change course. But if you're going south, you've got a problem. And I think, retirement, see, one of the issues, it's this short term, the long term. And it's very tempting nowadays, and, pension freedoms hasn't helped. It's very tempting for people to think about the short term. I don't want to buy an annuity because I can go into drawdown and I've got access, to the income. But retirement is a much longer journey than people expect, and certainly as you get older, it's more important that people have this what I call peace of mind and security, and that's code for knowing that you've got enough money in the bank or in your pension pot or in your investments that no matter what comes along, you're always going to maintain your standard of living. Absolutely. So again, been hugely enlightening, that conversation, Billy. So I appreciate your time. I think, again, we will point people to your website in the show notes and where they can find out more information about you and the company you do and all the guides that I know you've written. And when they see your name in the papers, they'll recognize it and go, that's the chap I listened to on the podcast. So that's all great. So I really appreciate your time. Is there any closing comments that you'd like to make? Just remember the words of, Voltaire. I urge you to carry on living solely despite those people paying your annuities.
Fantastic. Well, those are brilliant closing remarks. Thank you for your time, Billy. And I look forward to meeting you at the conference circuit soon. Thanks, Billy.
Right. Good. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
If you'd like to find out more about William's guides, check out the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll also find some useful links. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you have, please do leave a review on iTunes by searching for the Retirement Café Podcast or subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Thank you once again to our sponsors, MFP Wealth Management, for supporting this podcast, and you can find out more about them at mfpwealthmanagement.co.uk. Until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Café Podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.